The mining station groaned like a wounded beast as it circled the dying star, its metal bulk shuddering against the constant pull of gravity and the relentless hum of failing machinery. The corridors beyond Kellen's cell echoed with a hollow, rhythm alarms bleeding in uneven cycles, pipes dripping steadily, the stench of rust, sweat, and recycled air pressing down like a weight. It was a place for the forgotten, and in her small chamber she was no exception. Shackled at the wrists and ankles, Kalen sat slumped against the cold plating, her scales dulled from grime and starvation. The once lustrous sheen that marked her as Tari nobility had faded to a dull gray, her body bruised from days of rough handling and careless cruelty. She had counted the seconds, the minutes, the hours until time itself had lost meaning. The chains bit into her skin whenever she shifted, but they were nothing compared to the deeper wound carved inside her chest. Memory burned hotter than the star outside, replaying in cruel clarity. The raid had come swift and merciless. Slavers stormed their outpost, blasters lighting the night, and her people had scattered like frightened birds. She had called to them her companions, her fellow scouts from the Dominion, believing that together they would fight, that together they would endure. Instead, they had fled, abandoning her to the slaver's claws. Their eyes had avoided hers. In that final moment, some too ashamed, others too desperate to care. Betrayal cut sharper than any blade, sharper than any chain. She had thought her kind bound by loyalty, but in that instant, she learned the truth. When faced with death, even kin could turn into strangers. She pressed her forehead against the wall, letting the coolness seep into her fevered skin. Hope had bled out long ago. She whispered her father's name, the High Counselor of the Tari, though she knew he would never hear her. Her voice was hoarse, little more than a rasp, swallowed by the darkness. Perhaps this was how it would end, forgotten, broken, discarded in a cage on a forgotten station. Better to embrace silence than feed herself with false dreams. The hiss of hydraulics cut through her thoughts. Her eyes snapped open, luminous in the dim glow of the cell light. The door slid back with a groan, spilling stale corridor light across her huddled form. Kalen tensed, expecting another slaver come to mock her or drag her away for sport. She pulled her knees closer to her chest, lips curling in defiance, even as her heart beat wildly against her ribs. But the figure that stepped through was not what she expected. Broad-shouldered, clad in warm but battle-ready armor, a rifle slung low across his chest. His face was human, weathered, sharp-eyed, carrying the hard lines of someone who had seen too much and survived it all the same. A stranger, but not a slaver. His boots rang against the deck as he entered, his expression flat, detached, as if the filth and despair of this place didn't touch him. For a moment, silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the hum of the failing light overhead. Kellen's throat tightened. Of all the species in the galaxy, a human? She bared her teeth, the last weapon she had, and hissed, "You'll get nothing from me." The man's voice was low, carrying the gravel of exhaustion, but steadied with steel. "I'm not here to take. I'm here to cut you loose." He reached to his belt, pulling free a plasma torch that flared alive in his hand with a sharp hiss. The pale blue glow lit the hard planes of his face, and for a fleeting instant she saw something behind his eyes resolve. Yes, but also something rarer. In a place like this, not greed, not cruelty, purpose. Kellen's breath caught. After all the betrayals, after all the broken promises, after all the chains and darkness, it was not her own people who had come. Not the companions who had sworn to stand by her dot. It was a lone human. And as the hiss of the plasma torch drew closer to her shackles, Kalen realized her story was not ending here. It was beginning again, though with a twist no destiny had ever dared whisper. Salvation, delivered by the hand of the very species she had once been taught to distrust. The corridor beyond the cell smelled of ozone and rust, the tongue of burnt circuits riding the air. Marcus Howley moved like a shadow, rifle held tight against his chest as he guided the alien girl through the narrow passage. His every step was measured, calculated, the stride of a soldier who had lived too long in hostile places. Kaelin stumbled. Beside him, her weakened legs still stiff from days in chains. She hated the way her body trembled, hated more the fact that she leaned against him for support. His grip on her arm was firm, but not cruel, his touch steady as iron. Her gaze flicked to his face when the dim lights flared over them, and she studied the lines cut deep into his skin. A scar traced his jaw. Another nicked his brow silent. Stories of battles fought and survived. He was a man tempered by hardship. That much was clear. Yet why was he here? Why risk his life for a stranger, an alien, when her own kin had abandoned her without a backward glance? "You're limping," Marcus muttered without looking at her, his tone clipped and professional. "Can you keep up?" Kellen's pride surged despite the ache in her muscles. "I am Tari. I will not fall behind." He gave her the faintest sideways glance, a twitch of something close to amusement tugging at his mouth, but he said nothing. Instead, he raised a hand, signaling her to stop. He pressed his back against the bulkhead, rifle angled toward the corner ahead. Kaelin held her breath. She could hear it too now, muffled footsteps, the clatter of weapons, voices barking orders in a language thick and guttural. Slavers. Marcus mouthed a single word, "Stay." Before she could protest, he slid forward in a predator's crouch, slipping into the open with the silence of smoke. The ambush was brutal in its efficiency. 3 slavers turned, too slow to raise their rifles before Marcus's weapon coughed light and thunder. One dropped instantly, chest blown open. Another screamed as plasma burned through his arm. The third lunged, and Marcus met him head-on, driving the stock of his rifle into the alien's jaw with a crack that echoed down the corridor. Kaelin watched, heart-hammering. He fought like no one she had ever seen, not the disciplined ranks of her people, not the wild fury of mercenaries. His movements were raw and precise, the violence of necessity. Every strike meant to end the fight quickly and without wasted. Energy dot when silence fell, broken only by the hiss of leaking pipes. Marcus gestured sharply. "Move." She stepped past the bodies, her stomach twisting. Part of her recoiled at the human's brutality. Yet another part, buried deep and unwilling to admit itself, felt safer in his presence than she had in months. They moved on, deeper into the guts of the station. Kellen's mind was a storm of questions, but pride locked her tongue until at last she whispered, "Why? Why free me? You gain nothing from this." Marcus didn't slow, didn't look at her. "Not everything's about gain." She bit back a retort. For a people who had left her in chains, survival had always been a matter of gain. But this human spoke as if the word had no meaning. It unsettled her more than the gunfire dot as they rounded another corner. The distant blare of sirens rose, shrill and angry. Lights flashed red across the walls. The station had noticed its breach, and the slavers were rallying. Marcus swore under his breath. "Looks like we've got company. Stay close." Kellen's throat was dry, but her voice came steady. "I have no choice, human." For the first time since she had seen him, Marcus turned to meet her gaze fully. His eyes were flint, unyielding, but somewhere in their depths flickered something dangerous and fragile, all at once conviction. "You have more choice than you think," he said. Then he chambered a fresh round into his rifle and pushed forward. Into the shadows, Kaelin at his side, the thunder of boots already closing in behind them. Her chains were gone, but her fate was tied now to this lone human. And in the pit of her heart, a new, unsettling thought began to take root. Perhaps her survival had never depended on her people at all. The air thickened with smoke and heat as alarms howled through the station's failing bulkheads. Harsh red strobes bathed the passageways in flickering light, painting Marcus and Kalen in shifting shades of crimson and shadow. The slavers were closing in. Kalen could hear their guttural shouts, the scrape of boots, and the metallic clatter of weapons echoing from all directions. The station had become a trap, its twisting corridors a maze designed to herd them toward slaughter. Marcus moved with ruthless focus, cutting corners, rifle at the ready, eyes flicking over every junction. Kalen struggled to match his pace, her legs still weak, her body screaming from hunger and bruises. Yet she pushed forward, refusing to falter. She would not give her captors, or this human, the satisfaction of seeing her break. A plasma bolt tore past, sizzling against the wall inches from her head. Kalen gasped and ducked instinctively, the sharp tongue of ozone filling her nostrils. Marcus shoved her behind him with one hand, returning fire in a smooth burst that dropped the slaver before he could fire again. The human didn't hesitate, didn't waste breath on curses or fear. His every action was stripped to essentials, a predator surviving by instinct and discipline. They sprinted across a grated walkway suspended above a cavernous chamber. Below, molten slag bubbled in vast tanks, the byproduct of decades of mining the dying star's fragments. The heat rose in suffocating waves, sweat beading on Kellen's brow. Shots rained down from catwalks on the opposite side, forcing Marcus to grab her wrist and pull her into a dive. They slammed into cover behind a rusting conduit, sparks spitting from ruptured cables. Kalen pressed a hand to her chest, her pulse hammering. She should have been terrified, and she was, but something else burned hotter. Watching Marcus fight, she realized he was no ordinary soldier. He didn't fight for wealth, nor for conquest. There was no greed in his movements, no cruelty in his eyes. There was only the hard certainty of a man who refused to quit, who refused to let another life be crushed under chains. A blast rocked the catwalk, sending shards of metal raining down. Kalen hissed, curling away as sparks grazed her scaled skin. Marcus barely flinched, shoving aside debris and firing upward until the return fire ceased. He turned to her, breathing hard. "We can't stay pinned here. You know this place better than I do. Where's the nearest way to the hangars?" Kalen hesitated. Trust was a wound still raw, but survival left little room for doubt. She closed her eyes, summoning the half-remembered schematics her scout team had studied before their betrayal. Maintenance shafts, 2 levels down. Narrow, but they'll bypass the main patrol routes. Marcus nodded once. "Good. Lead the way." Her throat tightened. For the first time in days, perhaps in her life, someone had asked her to lead, not commanded her or abandoned her. She rose, her legs trembling but steadying with each step. They scrambled down rusted ladders, weaving through dripping pipes and narrow crawl spaces that stank of oil and mold. The sirens were muffled here, the echoes of pursuit distant, though still relentless. Marcus moved close behind her, his presence a constant shield in the suffocating dark. When they reached a junction, Kalen froze. Ahead, pale light glowed from the shaft's end. The hangar wasn't far, but a cluster of slavers stood guard. At the access hatch, their weapons glinting under the harsh lamps. She felt her chest seize with despair. After everything, after clawing her way out of chains, was this the end? Marcus laid a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. His voice was low, grim, but unwavering. "We fight through. Stay behind me, no matter what." Kellen's lips parted to protest, to tell him she could fight, that she was not some fragile creature to be protected. But when she met his gaze, the words died. There was no arrogance in his command, no dismissal of her strength. Only the raw determination of a man willing to bleed to drag them both through hell. Her heart thudded in her chest, torn between fear and something far more dangerous hope. The slavers at the hatch raised their rifles as Marcus stepped into the light, his own weapon already roaring fire. Plasma bolts streaked the air, screams echoing through the narrow shaft as chaos erupted. Kaelin pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide, as the lone human carved a path forward with relentless precision. For the first time since her capture, she believed escape was not just possible, but inevitable. And for the first time since her companion's betrayal, she believed she might not have to face the darkness alone. The hangar loomed before them like the hollow heart of a dying beast, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor littered with half-stripped ships and gutted cargo haulers. Broken scaffolds dangled overhead, cables swaying in the stale air. Emergency lights pulsed scarlet against the steel bulkheads, and the blare of klaxons made every breath feel like a countdown. Kaelin stumbled through the doorway at Marcus's side, her body aching but her mind sharp, senses prickling with unease. For a fleeting moment, she let herself believe freedom was close. Rows of ships stretched before them, most in disrepair, but some whole enough to promise escape. Marcus scanned the deck, his rifle steady, his jaw set like stone, his gaze locked. On a compact shuttle at the far end, a vessel small enough for one pilot, but fast enough to outrun pursuit. "This way," he growled, pulling her forward. They weaved between crates and wreckage, keeping low, the silence of their flight broken only by distant boots clanging against catwalks. Kaelin's lungs burned. She thought of the chains that had bound her, of the nights she had whispered for rescue into a void that answered only with silence. Now the chains were gone, yet her heart was heavier than she could bear. Not because of fear, no. She was used to fear, but because the truth of her betrayal pressed against her like a blade at her throat. A faint shimmer drew her gaze, half buried. Beneath a toppled crate was a holopad, flickering weakly. She slowed, tugging against Marcus's grip. "Wait," he turned, irritation flashing in his eyes. "We don't have time." But Kaelin had already stooped, fingers trembling as she activated the device. A distorted image crackled to life, the faces of her companions. Tari scouts, her scouts huddled in the hold of a fleeing transport. Their voices filled the space, raw with desperation. "She'll slow us down. They want her, not us. If we give her up, maybe we'll live." "We have no choice." Kaelin's blood ran cold. Their faces blurred through her tears, but their voices cut with cruel clarity. They hadn't abandoned her in panic. They had traded her, sold her to the slavers like scrap, choosing their survival over her life. Her chest heaved, the challah slipping from her hands to clatter against the floor. Marcus knelt beside her, eyes narrowing as he caught fragments of the recording. He didn't speak, not immediately. Instead, he reached out, resting a scarred hand lightly against her arm. His voice, when it came, was quiet but unyielding. "They made their choice. You make yours now." Kaelin shook her head, fury and grief colliding in her throat. "They were my kin, my brothers, my oath-bound. I would have died for them." Marcus's grip tightened. "And they would have let you. Don't waste yourself on ghosts who didn't deserve you." His words struck like a hammer, harsh yet laced with something she had not expected, understanding. She turned toward him, and in his eyes she saw not pity, but reflection, the shadow of old betrayals, wounds he carried beneath his armor. He knew what it was to be left behind. The hangar trembled as a blast reverberated through the station. Shouts rose closer, weapons clattering against steel. The slavers had found them. Marcus stood, hauling her up with him. "We get to that shuttle, or we die here." Kaelin wiped the tears from her face, jaw tightening. Tahala's glow still burned in her mind, but alongside the bitter ache of betrayal came a spark of something fiercer, rage. She was not broken. She would not die in chains, and she would not die forgotten. If her kin had traded her life away, then she would carve a new fate with her own hands, even if it meant standing with this human. She straightened, lifting her chin, her violet eyes hard. "Then let us fight." Marcus allowed himself the faintest curve of a smile, grim and approving. "That's more like it." Together, they sprinted into the chaos of the hangar. The echo of boots and the hiss of weapons closing in. Above them, alarms wailed. Ships shuddered against docking clamps, and the station seemed to groan in anticipation of the storm about to unfold. For the first time since her capture, Kaelin no longer felt like a prisoner. She felt like a warrior again, and this time she would not be left behind. Blinding light strobed through the hangar as slaver squads spilled from the catwalks above, their guttural war cries echoing over the roar of klaxons. Plasma bolts lanced, the air in a deadly lattice, sizzling against bulkheads and scorching the metal deck. Marcus shoved Kaelin behind a stack of cargo containers, his rifle already barking streams of fire that dropped the first wave before they could advance. Kaelin crouched low, scales shimmering faintly in the flashing red light. Her muscles screamed for rest, but fury steadied her trembling limbs. The holopad's cruel message still rang in her ears, her brothers and sisters casting her away like carrion. Rage coiled in her chest like a living thing, and for the first time since her capture, she welcomed it. It was fire in her veins, burning hotter than fear. Marcus reloaded with practiced speed, his jaw set like iron. "We won't hold this position. We punch through them fast and hard, or we're boxed in." Kaelin's gaze snapped to the slavers, tightening their formation near the shuttle bay doors. Her instincts as a scout stirred awake, long dormant but not forgotten. She saw angles, Marcus couldn't, routes where cover lay thin, blind spots waiting to be exploited. Her pride warred with her exhaustion, but finally she leaned close, her voice low and fierce. "There's a fuel line overhead. Strike it, and the fire will scatter them." Marcus flicked a glance upward, then back at her. For a moment, there, eyes locked, an unspoken pact passing between them. Without hesitation, he rose, firing a volley that ripped through the fuel conduit. With a thunderous humph, the line erupted, spraying flame and smoke across the slaver ranks. Screams tore the air as the aliens broke formation, some consumed in the inferno, others stumbling in blind panic. Marcus didn't waste the opening. He surged forward, rifle spitting death. Kaelin followed, no longer the caged, broken creature he had found in chains. She grabbed a fallen slaver's sidearm, its weight foreign but steady in her grip. With every blast, she felt pieces of herself, knitting back together the warrior she had been, the one her companions had betrayed, clawing her way back into the light. The fight was a blur of fire and fury. Marcus carved a path with relentless precision, each shot dropping an enemy cleanly, each movement honed by years of survival. Kaelin fought beside him with raw defiance, her strikes fueled by the betrayal. Festering in her chest, she moved with a grace alien and fierce, her scales catching the firelight as if she were born of flame itself. Then the tide shifted. A towering brute, heavier armored than the rest, charged from the smoke, a massive ion hammer crackling in its fists. Marcus pivoted to engage, but the alien swung first, the hammer smashing into his chestplate and hurling him against a wall. He hit with a grunt, the rifle skittering from his grip. Kaelin's breath seized. Without thought, she leapt between Marcus and the brute, firing the stolen sidearm until its core overheated, blue-white bolts slamming into the alien's chest. The brute roared, swinging the hammer again, but she ducked low, pain lancing through her side as the weapon grazed her ribs. With a snarl, she drove forward, slamming the pistol's overheated frame into the alien's throat. The weapon exploded in a burst of molten shrapnel, dropping the brute to the deck in a smoking heap. Kaelin staggered back, clutching her scorched side. Marcus was already on his feet, pulling her upright with one hand and scooping his rifle with the other. His voice was rough, urgent, but tinged with something deeper. "You saved my ass." Kaelin met his eyes, breath ragged, her scaled skin glistening with blood and sweat. "No," she rasped. "We saved each other." The last of the slavers broke under their combined assault, fleeing into the smoke. The hangar fell quiet, but for the crackle of fire and the groan of tortured steel. The stolen shuttle loomed ahead, its hull gleaming under emergency lights. Marcus gripped her arm, steadying her as they limped toward it together. For the first time since the chains had closed around her wrists, Kaelin felt something rise in. Her chest that she had thought long dead. Not rage, not despair. Hope. And as the shuttle's ramp lowered with a hiss, she knew this human had done more than free her body. He had freed the warrior within her, and she would never be a prisoner again. The shuttle's engines whined as they powered up, vibrations rattling the deck beneath their boots. Marcus sealed the hatch with a heavy clang, locking out the chaos of the burning hangar behind them. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, broken only by the steady hum of the ship coming alive. Kaelin collapsed into one of the crash seats, her chest heaving, violet eyes still sharp despite the pain etched across her features. The burn at her side throbbed, but she gritted her teeth, unwilling to show weakness. Marcus slid into the pilot's chair, fingers flying across the controls. His face was a mask of concentration, jaw clenched as he forced the stubborn vessel to respond. Sparks danced across the console, but slowly the systems fell into place. With a low growl, he coaxed the shuttle free of its moorings. It lurched, then steadied, surging away from the crumbling station and into the black expanse of space. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Kaelin breathed air untainted by the stink of slavers. Stars gleamed beyond the viewport, cold and eternal. She pressed a trembling hand to her ribs, letting the moment sink in. She was free, and yet freedom felt fragile, a candle in a storm. Marcus flicked switches, setting the ship on autopilot. For the moment, then turned his chair toward her. His gaze swept over her injuries, lingering on the scorch marks marring her scales. "You're hurt. I've survived worse," Kaelin said flatly. But her voice lacked its usual venom. Something in his steady presence stripped the barbs from her words. He studied her a moment longer, then leaned back, his shoulders sagging against the chair. For the first time since she had seen him, Marcus looked less like an unbreakable soldier, and more like a man carrying a weight too heavy to set down. The silence stretched, until finally he spoke, his voice low and rough. "I know what it's like," he said, not meeting her eyes. "To be left behind." Kaelin stiffened. The words struck too close to her raw wound. "You presume much, human." Marcus's lips twisted in a humorless smile. "Do I? My squad was supposed to have my back. We went in together. We bled together until the day the op went bad. Orders were compromised. Everything fell apart. When extraction came, they cut me loose to save themselves." He tapped his scarred chest with 2 fingers. "I crawled out alone. Since then, I don't trust anyone to watch my 6. His eyes finally lifted, locking onto hers with a flinty honesty. "But when I saw you in that cell, I couldn't walk away. I guess I saw too much of myself sitting there in chains." Kaelin's throat tightened. She wanted to sneer, to remind him that he was human and she was Tari, that their worlds had no place overlapping. Yet the fire in his words, the rawness of his confession, cracked something deep inside her. She turned her gaze to the stars, her voice barely a whisper. "They sold me," she said. "My companions, they did not run from fear. They bargained my life for their freedom." Her hands curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. I was nothing more than a weight to them. Marcus said nothing, but the way his jaw flexed, the way his eyes softened, told her he understood. For a long while, the shuttle hummed through the void in silence. Then Kaelin drew a shuddering breath. "Do you know why the slavers wanted me?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Because you're valuable?" She shook her head, her scales catching the dim light. "Because of what?" "I know. They hunted me for information my people entrusted to me alone. Knowledge that cost lives, that stained my hands with the blood of those who believed me worthy of the burden." Marcus leaned forward, voice low. "What kind of information?" Kaelin hesitated, fear flickering across her features. But then she met his gaze steady, unyielding, laced with the same conviction that had carried her out of chains. She swallowed hard, her voice grave. "Coordinates," she whispered, "to the stronghold of a power beyond anything you faced. They... Vukari." The name hung heavy in the cabin, chilling the air. Marcus's expression hardened, the soldier in him snapping back into place. "I've heard whispers, ghost stories, worlds burned clean. Thought it was just scare tactics." Her eyes glistened with a haunted sheen. "They are no story. They are coming. And unless we stand together, human, there will be nothing left to fight for." Marcus sat back slowly, the weight of her words settling on him like a stone. He had freed her to break chains, but in doing so, he had stumbled into a war far greater than either of them. And as the shuttle streaked into the stars, both of them knew their fragile alliance was no longer just about survival. It was about facing the storm of annihilation together, or dying alone in the dark. The shuttle drifted in silence, its engines throttled low as it coasted through the endless dark. Stars stretched across the void, cold and pitiless, but to Kaelin, they had never seemed so fragile. She sat curled in the crash seat, arms wrapped around herself, violet eyes fixed on the shifting patterns of light. Marcus sat across from her, elbows on his knees, rifle resting beside him. Neither spoke at first. The weight of her revelation lingered between them like an unseen predator, crouched in the shadows. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "Tell me." "Everything." His tone was quiet, stripped of the bark of command, but there was steel in it. He wasn't asking as a soldier following orders. He was asking as a man who understood what it meant to carry a truth too heavy to bear alone. Kaelin hesitated. The words clawed at her throat, sharp with fear and sorrow. She had guarded this secret through capture, torture, betrayal, believing silence would keep it safe. But now, staring into the human's unwavering eyes, she felt the barriers inside her crack. "They are not like us," she whispered. "Not like any species you have faced. The Vukari are hunger-given form. They do not conquer. They do not enslave. They erase. Worlds vanish in their wake, burned to ash, every living thing stripped away. My people sent me to find allies, to warn the galaxy, but no one listened. Not the Zarak, not the caring tribes, not even the Dominion I bled for. They called it fear-mongering, or worse, lies to pull them into another war. So my companions decided the truth was not worth dying. Foar. They cast me to the slavers, believing if I perished, the burden would vanish with me." Her voice cracked. She pressed a trembling hand to her face, trying to hide the tears streaking down her cheeks. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. He let her bleed the words out. Because he knew sometimes silence was the only salve dot, she lowered her hand, her expression hardening. "But they were wrong. The burden does not vanish. The coordinates are here. She tapped her temple with two fingers, burned into my mind. The place where the Vukari gather. Their fleets, their forges, their war machine. I am the map that leads to their heart. Marcus's chest tightened as the enormity sank in. Humanity had heard whispers of the Vukari phantom fleets, colonies gone dark without explanation. But here was proof, sitting bloodied and scarred across from him. The enemy was real. And this alien girl, abandoned by her own, was the key to finding them. Why tell me? He asked at last, voice low. Kellen's eyes met his, shimmering with both. Defiance and fragility. Because you freed me when even my own would not. Because you fought for me without reason, when others sold me for their lives. Because... Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Because I want to believe that somewhere in this cursed galaxy there is still someone who will not run. The words hung between them, raw and unguarded. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He had built walls of iron around his heart, forged in the fire of betrayal. But this alien girl, this warrior torn from her people, was prying them apart without even trying. He leaned forward, resting his scarred hands on the rifle between his knees. Then believe it, I'm not running, and neither will my people. We've faced extinction before, and we'll face it again if we have to. But we don't quit. Not ever. Kellen's lips trembled into the faintest smile, though her eyes still glistened with pain. You humans, she murmured, almost to herself. So stubborn, so reckless. Perhaps that is what the galaxy needs. A sharp alarm suddenly blared through the shuttle, red light spilling across the cabin. Marcus shot to his feet, checking the console. His gut clenched. We've been tagged. Distress beacon from the station pulled in company. Kellen's chest tightened. The slavers? Marcus shook his head grimly. No, worse, look. The viewport filled with silhouettes emerging from hyperspace dark, jagged vessels that pulsed with an unnatural glow. Their shapes were wrong, asymmetrical, and alien, as if they'd been built by something that did not think as flesh and blood did. The Vukari. Kellen's breath caught, her face paling. They've found us. Marcus gripped the controls, eyes narrowing. His voice was steady, cold with resolve. Then it starts here? The shuttle rocked as the first wave of enemy fire streaked past, the void igniting with deadly light. Kellen's hand gripped the armrest until her knuckles whitened, but her gaze never wavered in that moment. Human and alien sat together on the edge of annihilation, bound not by orders or duty, but by choice. Betrayed, scarred, yet unbroken, they would stand against the storm, the fate of their peoples, perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself, now burned in the fragile alliance of one lone soldier and one abandoned girl. And as Marcus gunned the engines, teeth bared in a grim smile, his voice rang out over the roar of the shuttle systems. Let's show them what happens when you corner humanity.